My name is Elif Bereketli. I am a journalist and a presenter for TRT World, and I will be moderating this panel. What will we be talking about? We will be talking about the impact of infodemic in the virtual world and how to combat fake news, whether outlawing could be a solution or could it just prove to be counterproductive, and whether a preventive approach could be deployed, and whether search for truth is a failed enlightenment project. Well, these are all tough questions indeed, but this is why we have our experts and important actors who are trying to find solutions in their own countries. Obviously, there are challenges, slippery slopes, and there are ideas, so we'll be exploring them all. We'll make it a real global conversation. I'm joined by, to my right, Lolva Rashid Al-Khater, Assistant Foreign Minister and spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Qatar. Next to Lolva Rashid Al-Khater is Bruno Maçães. He's an author and former European Minister of Portugal. And we have Hikmet Hacıyev, Assistant of the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, and Yulian Kifu, President of the Center for Conflict Prevention and Early Warning. They will all be bringing their own insight into this conversation. Before we start, just a quick reminder that if time permits, we would like to take your questions as well. We have 45-minute slot for this conversation. Please do join us if time permits again. So without further ado, just to use time effectively, I want to turn to Mrs. Al-Khater. Please start by explaining how significant of a threat you think is fake news and this massive digital misinformation to our societies today.
Please allow me to thank the Forum of Antalya Diplomacy Forum, and this is their first edition in this beautiful city, so I wish them best of luck and many more editions to come. And I'm deeply honored to be with the esteemed panelists here. Indeed, a very timely topic. A few years back, Oxford Dictionary used or chose the term post-truth as the word of the year. And indeed, this is one of the distinctive phenomena that we witness in our age. Never was witnessed at that level and intensity and volume in our human history. One of the manifestations of that, obviously, is fake news and disinformation, or the infodemic phenomenon, if you wish. But I would like also to emphasize that this is not solely the result of social media. This process of truth decay, if you wish, is a process that started decades ago. One of its manifestations, obviously, is what we're witnessing in social media. Social media has brought different dimensions to it, has changed it structurally, but it has not invented this phenomenon. And if you allow me, I would like to consult this very excellent inquiry done by Micah Rich and Jennifer Kavanagh on truth decay. Now, the inquiry itself, as the cover page suggests, is more of US-oriented inquiry, yet the first two chapters, I would say, are more universal as they set the framework. Now, if you allow me, if we go through just a few titles here, in chapter 2, they discuss 4 trends of truth decay. So the first one, they talk about increasing disagreement about facts and analytical interpretations of facts and data. This is something that used to be discussed in academia within certain circles, yet now it is being questioned and challenged at a very popular and grassroots level, and this is what's new about it. Let's take, for example, COVID-19. Scientists are being questioned and challenged by just pretty much anyone who has a mobile phone. And I'm coming to more details as I read the other trends. The second trend they're talking about is the blurring of the line between opinion and fact. Now, this is very interesting because traditionally, both in Greek philosophy, Islamic philosophy, many cultures, the knowledge or the theory of knowledge was drawing a very clear distinction between applied sciences, empirical sciences, and other forms of knowledge that are subject to argumentation and opinions. But what we're witnessing now is a very different phenomenon, where we are mixing up opinion and fact, and it becomes very difficult to discern what is reality, what is perception, what is a fact, what's an opinion. So this is definitely something new that needs our attention in general as academics, as decision makers, and policy analysts as well. The third phenomenon is the increasing relative volume and resulting influence of opinion and personal experience over fact. Now, throughout history, people have been sharing their own experiences. What's wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong about that. Yet, the intensity and volume that we're witnessing is just unprecedented. To give you an example, I mean, who in this room does not have a social media account of any platform or a mobile phone? In other words, each single one of us has become a producer of knowledge, not only a consumer of knowledge. Which means that sharing our personal experience becomes almost equivalent of a scientist sharing facts. And we see this all the time. Once again, within the context of the pandemic, you see a scientist, you see a doctor, you see a representative of WHO coming out with supposedly results of scientific and methodological inquiries. But then you see someone else who's countering this through their own experience. I witnessed that, I saw that, I know a relative who went through this experience and that experience. That's a very different type of sharing personal experience. It's almost an alternative to the traditionally scientific methodologies. And I'll conclude with this last point: declining trust in formerly respected sources of factual information. This is very problematic. We see this at state level, for example, where state officials or institutions share information, but then they're not necessarily considered by many as trusted source of knowledge, right? And this, of course, applies at the multilateral level. I gave the example of WHO, but the list of examples are endless.
Okay, well, that's great. You opened up really important topics, and I really want to delve deeper into some of them, especially, how to decide what is truth, what is personal experience, and, how to decide what is fake news and what's not. And I would love to, turn to Mr. Masayas for that. But before that, I really want to hear, especially you mentioning, declining trust in digital diplomacy, especially as the new dynamics are changing and it's undermining the trust public has for institutions of the digital diplomacy. How important is it in your agenda right now, combating fake news?
Thank you. I'm also extremely thankful for organizing this important forum by Brussels, Turkey, and we are extremely pleased to be here, and also a distinguished panel what we have today, and quite important topic that we are discussing. On our daily basis, almost, we are fighting against fake news. Recent 44 days once again demonstrated severeness in the experience of Azerbaijan how fake news and fighting against fake news is extremely important. Just let me give you one example. In the course of the military operation, there was information from the official sources of the Republic of Armenia, F-16 belonging to the Air Force of the Turkey hit Armenian Su-25, as a result of which it has been destroyed, and it went everywhere. And with another problem was that all important media outlets were asking this question to Azerbaijan side, but F-16 belonging Turkish armed forces on the air of Azerbaijan attacking Armenian armed forces or Armenian Air Force, simply so fake. There was no F-16, there was no F-16 in the air, but this information spread around. For how we can effectively fight fake news. One of the reasons, one of the methodologies that we try to apply is an effective and immediate response and providing real facts on the ground. But sometimes it's not so effective because we have a social media that has been augmenting, in a sense, fake news that has been put in the social media through different ways. And then artificial intelligence and learning machines, these are also the elements that further aggravates the situation that we are facing. as regards fake news, disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, these are different terminologies that we're all using. But here I would like to come yet another problem, that we are facing the problem of lacking one unified definition of these problems. It also applies to same terminology problems in regards to terrorism. Many countries, and every country has its own definition of terrorism. And we also have a different definitions for the disinformation and fake news. One side considers them one way, another country in another way. Therefore, it requires international action, and multilateral diplomacy should be here effective to identify and to come to one single ideology or terminology about what we are talking about and what should be our effective methodologies fighting against that. And current information situation, your first question was also about information epidemics. It's somehow considered, in a sense, information disorder that we are facing. And COVID-19 once again over-demonstrated that international community, as we are facing with a pandemic of information. Since that it's an accurate information or inaccurate information, fake news or true news, it doesn't matter. But we have a flow of information, a lot of experts and some others jumping into the fore, and we ourselves are confused who is right and who is wrong. And then there is yet another segment, some countries, some institutions, or even some private companies are using this space for psychological warfare against particular countries or particular institutions and particular our societies. And here, I believe, major share of responsibility goes to the major companies, that's Facebook, Google, Amazon, and some others as well. And in a sense, current information disorder can be also considered like a wild capitalism or disorganized capitalism. But we need the regulation more, and here we need more international cooperation, and multilateral diplomacy should be a key factor here.
Thank you so much for this. You have really pointed out to many of suggested solutions for fake news and post-truth era. And Mr. Macias, I want to turn to you. For the last few years, we've been talking about all these, solutions, possible solutions about how to guide against misinformation, and it doesn't really seem to be making a difference as of yet. And you suggest in one of your books that technology will find a solution to fake news and post-truth. Tell us what you mean, and tell us what you think is the way out of this.
Yes, so I agree with the previous speakers that we live in a very dangerous moment in a way. Everyone has his or her truth. We don't trust anyone else to tell us what is the truth. That is part of the problem. Who has the authority to tell us what is true? We want to decide for ourselves. And second, there is something rather noble and very human about fighting against truth, because it allows us to be creative, to create new things. Truth sometimes is a prison. For example, if someone says it is a truth about human beings that we are subject to viruses and we have to live with viruses, there is something noble about saying, well, that is not the truth. We can change that. We can create a new world where we are, perhaps create a universal vaccine against every form of virus, which scientists are working on right now. So I think these tendencies, they don't just come from something bad in human nature. They come also from something good. And probably we are in a moment of transition. We have to move to a new system and find ways to deal with a world where truth is much more confusing. Perhaps it's going away, not just decaying, but going away forever. And we have to learn how to live in a world without truth. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just ignore reality, that we can, in a way, become collectively mad, or that we can lie. Or a question that I think is very important for governments right now, I've discussed it with the government in Singapore. What about people that use social media to raise one group, one ethnic group, against another ethnic group? Spread rumors about what this group did to someone from the other group, and in fact bring about ethnic conflict within a society. So this is not the creative impulse of science or the creative impulse of art. This is just deception, manipulation. We have to, in a way, draw a line between the good parts of fighting reality and the bad parts of manipulating, lying, deceiving, and making people turn against each other using those instruments. I think governments have to find this balance. So if you had asked me 20 years ago if a government can have some measure of control over information, well, if it is for the purpose of stopping ethnic conflict, why not? If it is for the purpose of imposing a single truth on the population, then I would say no.
Okay, well, is this sort of implying that combating fake news would be counterproductive?
I tend to think, I'm very curious what other speakers think, I tend to think that the best solution is to open up to different views.
Okay.
Usually fake news comes from the fact that some people have too much access and others don't have that access. And the best way to limit the impact of fake news is to have other kinds of perspectives in the platform and have this clash between different views.
Just sort of jumping on that particular issue, I don't think that fighting against Facebook could be counterproductive, but we should all admit that we don't know how to fight against it. And another question could be, as a government officers here, we are sitting, are we effective enough fighting against fake news? It could be internally within our societies, or internationally, some of our countries, particularly in the experience of my country, we're also facing hybrid warfare, and sometimes it's augmented like in a psychological warfare, and in the context of certain military operations and so on. Are we effective enough? Do we know the tools? And here I believe, once again, I would like to return to the same issue about the social media platforms and responsibilities. You are rightly mentioned there was a hate crime issue or dissemination of the hate in social media. Are we effective enough to raise up with the social media platforms when the hate issue popped up? When it's in English, at least we can fight about it. When it goes to some local language, it's extremely difficult. And here it comes yet another element of the manipulation of our societies and raising their attention and so on. Again, there was some suggestion by some international actors, especially. Really, when we are talking about the regulation, here comes another issue, freedom of expression. We are not challenging the freedom of expression, but really, we have created something without any particular regulation. Even the big companies themselves having a difficulty because there is a huge amount of inquiries coming. And also, fake news, fighting against fake news, why is it difficult? As a government officer, I don't have a really difficulty. Where is the door of the Facebook? To whom contact? Where is the Facebook? Only representative we identified, but recently they established in Turkey. Who is this gentleman? Who is this lady? Where to find them? And how we can bring our complaints to them? We don't know. Therefore, I think that really United Nations General Assembly is one of the platforms we should come together, because as a government, we have our obligations and commitments, and international companies and private institutions, they should also come together. And first, we should identify our regulations in the social media platform, because our major challenge lies over there. My dear sister, Ms. Al-Khater, was right that fake news, false news, disinformation, these are not new phenomena. They were always the case. But in the previous history of the mankind, they were in the context of the military operations mainly. But now social media augmented them further, where we should first start with the social media platforms, then go to some other spheres. Well, sorry for...
Just 5 seconds to make a quick point here. There's still choices to be made. So, for example, fake news, a government can respond by deleting and banning the social media post, or it can respond very quickly by having an addition saying, this is not true, for the correct information, check this.
Addition to the original post.
Well, addition
when
to the
you
original.
are providing your official information against fake news, so 1 million people already read it. And you can see 100,000 comments.
But if you edit it, then it's a different scenario,
But
right?
it has to be very quick. So the government of Singapore has
That's
a process
quick,
in place where you have to respond within minutes with a correction. If it's not within minutes, then you're
Of
right.
course.
It's too
You're lost.
So I really want to come back to the role social media platforms are supposed to play in this, and whether it should be a fight against Facebook, or can we take Facebook on board in the fight against fake news. But Mr. Kifu, I want to turn to you because I am curious to find out whether you think a preventive approach could be deployed in fighting against, just like you rightly pointed out, there is no fixated terminology on this, but let's call it fake news for now.
Yes, we can do that, but unfortunately we should have begun that some 20 years ago, because it's about education, and it doesn't happen overnight. Actually, technology has this added value, and in our times where technology is developing far quicker than we have the capacity of looking at the impact of that technology to our societies, to the politics, to so on and so forth. So actually we didn't make the impact study, but we released the technology. We are all happy and using it. The biggest part of the technology is good, so we are just looking at a very teeny part who creates problems. My second point is that, challenging the truth is not a thing that we've invented. Actually, the sophists invented originally. Then we had Nietzsche, who says that truth and false has the same value. Why should truth have a better value than the false? And then we had, Goebbels, who says the truth is what we are telling you is the truth. And now we are in a time where it's natural, it's healthy to question what is said. And that's the first step. The added value of social media is to get people together, to make people who has the same belief to get together and to share their ideas. It's an instrument of mobilization, and it's an instrument to challenge the only one truth. The side effects are the following, and I will just take them for the ones from democracy. First, we all know that democracy means that we have a public space. Everybody is putting their ideas, challenging one another, having the debate, and people to decide and to go to vote. Well, this is good, but having social media, we created bubbles. It makes extremism move inside those bubbles because everybody who stays in the bubble are just the people who have the same and share the same idea, and they are accelerating this and really exacerbating actually the idea. And those bubbles are not having a dialogue. So actually we changed the public space unique and in the, if you want, in the ideology of the democracy, and we shifted it in numerous millions of small groups who never communicate in between themselves and who are becoming extreme and who are actually creating rifts in the society. The second problem with the social media is the way it is financed. It is financed by clicks, by replying, by moving around, by a lot of people who enter and see the page together with the advertising attached. It means that we are changing the rules. It's a democratization. Everybody has a place where to say everything about what they want. And we are shifting from experts, specialists, who are more nuanced, who are expressing far more in a far more complicated and sophisticated way, and put those guys who are really the ones of reference together with the people who are extremists, who are very clear, who gave short sentences, and usually the extreme one. They don't have any questions, and they are putting these types of real direct communication, which has no nuances, and it's extreme by definition because of those very harsh statements, are the ones that are multiplying via net. It means that the social media is supporting extremism, populism, harsh speaking, and never the expertise, the professionals, and the other. These are the side effects. Actually, how can we do that? Well, we have to live with it. That's the real question. Education, it will come in time. But looking at the other side, because actually from the moment that we all have something like this and have access to millions and millions and millions of news and infos, everybody has access to us as well. There's no borders. There's no check of intentions. And by the way, informational warfare has been built. It's the 5th generation. We are just looking at the 3rd, the 4th one, and we are far behind the capacities and the instruments that somebody has against our population, using the same democracy, by the way, the same democratic rules, freedom of speech, freedom of circulation of ideas that we are cherishing and defend, and they are trying to create masses to manipulate, to get together and to challenge actually everything that a government could say and do. So on one hand, it's good because it's challenging the very harsh and direct and unique purposes of a government, of an autocracy, of everything. On another point, it's very difficult because at some point you don't have credibility, and building credibility and building doesn't go with the legitimacy of taking a public office. Well, I think that I compensated the time.
Exactly. Here,
Sorry.
Elif, you mentioned in the introduction, you mentioned about a declining role of media. In the fight against fake news and disinformation, where is the role of the traditional media? Traditionally, we get used to getting the verified information from the media and professional journalism was, in a sense, legitimizing or verifying information and providing to the wider public. But unfortunately, we also have the tendency that traditional journalism and media's reputation and credibility is also declining because traditional media is trying to catch up with the social media tendencies. In other words, traditional media becomes like a social media platforms, and traditional journalists, sometimes they also don't have enough time trying to react, and while reacting in a festive form, they also provide unverified information to the process. One of my colleagues from the journalism somehow compared with the current media and journalism with the declining power of aristocracy in the 17th century in England. But traditional
this is really interesting.
It's an interesting
Yes.
phenomenon. Really, journalism is also, to an extent, traditional journalism is declining, but we get used to get verified, legitimized information from the media.
Yeah.
But media is declining, and so can catch up with the tendencies and speed of the social media. And everybody is in
Mr.
social.
Hajji, I'm very
Yes.
sorry to
Yes,
cut
please.
you off there
Yeah.
because I really want to turn
Yeah.
to Mrs. Al-Khatir at this point because Al Jazeera Media Network it receives funding from the state of Qatar, but it aims to maintain its editorial independence as far as I'm concerned. In that sense, what do you think is the role of traditional media in quote-unquote combating fake news? And do you really think that, just like Mr. Hajji just pointed out, that it is the decline of autocracy?
That's a very good question. I'm not a representative of Al Jazeera, obviously. And Al Jazeera model is very similar to the BBC model, for example. It's funded by the UK government, but it has its own independent editorial line. I'll come to this point, if you allow me, just to make it come to a full circle. I mean, this discussion. There was an excellent point that was made by my colleague regarding what we may call more or less creative chaos in this sense, where we allow for different opinions so that the truth could be the accumulative result of those conflicting opinions, which is a very valid point. I mean, we've seen a very recent example of that with the events in Palestine, for example, what's happening in Jerusalem. Traditional media in this case, and to the point of my colleague, Brother Hikmet, when he mentioned basically the point about traditional media and how they're trying to catch up with the social media. My point here is, in the case of Palestine, traditional media was lacking maybe credibility, was behind, and we saw the phenomenon of citizen journalists with their phones reporting an alternative truth. Yet, I want to draw everyone's attention to a very important point. I think there is a structural change that is taking place. We are moving from the post-truth into the post-fact. That is very different. My colleague mentioned Nietzsche, for example. Nietzsche talked about the denial of the ultimate truth, the death of the divine, as he called it, right? That was a phase in human history and in human knowledge production and thinking. Yet what we're looking at right now is really challenging the very facts, and even more importantly and more dangerously, the ability to verify and establish just any fact. Now, this is the real challenge. I don't disagree with the notion that we need to have conflicting opinions to get to the maybe truth, if there is such a thing. But for us to move from that to the assumption that any fact cannot be established through any methodology, this is problematic, because this means not only absolute relativism, but even beyond that. So I think this is the main difference here. Going back to your question about traditional media, In my opinion, traditional media, as long as they uphold three characteristics, we should be in a good shape, more or less, right? One is basically verifying facts. So they don't just go and report without verifying the facts. And then they don't report fake news, knowing that it is fake news. Or even more dangerously, they don't make up fake news. Right? And then professionalism, that's the second characteristic. And the third one, multiplicity of opinions. So they should allow for that. As long as any media platform upholds those three characteristics, we should be in a good shape when it comes to the spectrum of objectivity. I won't talk about absolute neutrality, such a thing doesn't exist, but at least objectivity, which is a spectrum, and you can be at this end or that end or somewhere in the middle. So those who can accomplish these three criteria, professionalism, fact-checking, multiplicity of opinions, I think they will be contributing to what we're trying to achieve, that is establishing at least the basic facts.
If I may jump in.
Please.
We've heard about post-truth, about post-factual. It's even post-human and post-sensorial. You are convinced by somebody that what you see is not the truth. What you feel, what you touch is not the truth. That's the level of the disinformation 2.0. So actually, your senses does not help you, and actually it nullifies you as a human being. The post-human is the fact that actually we've invented for tackling the fake news, the artificial intelligence who looks at this and selects and tells you how things, you know where artificial intelligence led? It led to the fact that you can have every time, at any moment on the internet, a very specific leader claiming anything. And let's say you have Emmanuel Macron saying that he resigns. You could have had, I don't know, President Trump's ordering an attack, a nuclear attack. This is very easy. The White House or the Matignon or the Élysée are exiting and give a statement, and that's it. What are you going to do when you have 10 different truths? You have the same person, which is not the person, but it impersonates the official, even better than himself, who plays 10 alternatives in a very specific issue. How are you going to select the one? Well, I can tell you, the studies are showing us that 20% of the person cannot deal with this. 20% of the person are retreating from the electronic media, are isolating themselves, trying to live away from the mass because they can't understand. Another 20% of them, unfortunately, are subject to very complicated situations and diseases due to the fact that actually you cannot make a reason. What I want to tell you is that is the future. We have to adapt ourselves, our sons, the youngsters, to adapt to this reality. It's not a madness per se, it's a reality that we've created. And I can tell you, you cannot step back already.
Thank you so much for bringing the topic here, because I want to turn to Mr. Masses about this. It might sound a bit controversial, but I really want to hear what you have to say about whether we should be afraid of fake news or post-truth, or again, the terminology is a bit confusing here, but should we be afraid of what we're going through, or should we just get used to it and just accept the fact that this is a reality from now on?
I think I'm going to be the person in this panel who tries to say that we should get used to it and move ahead. The danger is more in the period of transition. But for example, deep fakes, there's going to be a period of transition where they're going to be extremely dangerous. So you got what the idea of a deep fake is, right? You have a perfect imitation of a political leader doing something on video. Now, after a period, people are going to start having doubts, and they're going to start becoming very skeptical. After a period of transition, perhaps it will take 1 or 2 decades, people will look at a video and they won't believe it immediately because they know it could be a deep fake. So the way out is going through the storm and getting out on the other side, or going through the tunnel and getting out on the other side. Because going back and finding one truth that all of us can believe in is going to be impossible. By the way, the example of the last year is a bit troubling because remember with the question of whether the virus came from a lab or came from a wild animal. I don't know myself. I haven't seen any evidence that inclines me to one theory or the other. And I keep looking. But the first few months, there was an attempt, obvious, to intimidate the people that thought it came from a lab, to call them racists, to censor. Twitter would actually delete your posts if you said it came from a lab, and Facebook would ban it for a period. And now, actually, we realize that there is a possibility it came from a lab. And the idea that someone up there, perhaps the CEO of a social media company, would be able to determine what the truth is and censor every other alternative is a dangerous idea. And by the way, they now admit that it wasn't done because they thought it was true. It was done because they thought it was better for society. Because to talk about a lab leak would create anti-Chinese feeling. Now, we cannot live in a society where the truth is decided for political reasons and every other alternative is censored. Because if we live in that society, then we're not going to be able to prevent the next pandemic if our eyes are closed to the facts. So the facts are a complicated thing because we never know what they are.
Yeah. We're in the final stretches. We don't have much time left, but I really want to touch upon something that actually Mr. Hajiev brought up before, so that we can go to our audiences, hopefully, because there's so many young people watching us, and I would really want to see you join in the conversation and ask a few questions if possible. Is a strong regulation the key to combating fake news? Because, you know, you mentioned that we should really draw a line between freedom of speech and limiting the spread of misinformation. It's a really sort of a slippery slope, isn't it? How do you deal with that?
We now see the tendency where some governments at a national level and adopting the national legislation and fighting against fake news in some countries, and in the experience fake news is not criminalized, and some countries are also taking harsh action with regards to social media platforms and requiring them to establish their offices. By the way, within the Turkey Council, we also raised up this issue along with Turkey, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and some other countries, and bring together our resources to identify what's a problem, and also whenever we have an issue, how we can effectively raise up with Twitter and other social media platforms. But putting this issue in a global level, colleagues mentioned development of the artificial intelligence and development of the algorithms behind the artificial intelligence. It's going to be more sophisticated, and it's in a steady growth process. How are we going to effectively fight against them, and how we also see the process of monopolization of entire social media platform by certain companies. And in the meantime, it's also monopolization of our individual lives and lives of our societies, and at the end of the day, it also affects the behavior of our states and wider international system. And therefore, we are facing international information disorder. Here comes, I believe, multilateral diplomacy. Governments should all admit that we should have our commitments. In the meantime, private sector institutions that are providing such services should have their commitments and obligations as well. There were such cases, difficult process or exercise that the international community faced up. But at the end of the day, we come up with a universal solution based on the general consensus about fighting certain menaces that we faced in the certain period of the humankind. It will not be an easy process, but therefore we need international consensus to start the process at some point. Now we see more fragmented actions in some regions as individual countries, like in a COVID, and you have rightly put the topic of our panel like an infodemic, information pandemia. COVID sooner or later going to end, hopefully, inshallah. But information pandemia will continue to resist and will continue to disseminate ism further. Therefore, it's in a time to start now and bring together all efforts of the international community effectively. I don't want to use the word in a fight, but effectively struggle against this menace. But I also see that even the creator of the social media platforms, while talking to them, some of them also admit that they have created one Frankenstein. Sometimes they also have a difficulty to manage it.
Okay, before we move on to our audiences, I really want to
Yes.
ask one last question, because it really is important to me. Given the different dynamics of different, geographical contexts of the globe at the moment, do you think there is in terms of legislation, one size fits all solution?
No, it's not going to work, of course. Every country is different. In one country, for example, hate speech is categorized to different categories. In another country, cultures, religions, and traditions are different. And every country has its own national legislation system. But at least we should have unified principles. What are the fundamental principles? It's like an international law. International law, we have a common principles of regulating interstate relations. We should also come to that point that having common fundamental principles of regulating, at least on a social media spectrum, where our governments are facing, our societies are facing such a challenge.
Okay. If any of you wants to add anything, then
Just add one point. I mean, maybe part of the problem is technology, but also part of the solution is technology. So it's very important to focus on this. And then legislation. So these are two dimensions are very important. And then the different levels. So national is very important, regional is very important, and multilateral is very important. We ourselves in the state of Qatar went through our own challenges in 2017. Basically, our news agency was hacked to be used as a pretext for a blockade that was imposed on us later on. My wider point was there wasn't a clear guideline. There wasn't a manual for us. Where do we complain? Where do we go? How do we verify? So I think there needs to be some sort of a manual at a national level, regional level, but also multilateral level.
Can I pick hit here?
please.
With solutions. So, except for defense and security matters where we have different types of instruments, actually we should just adapt. It's, since we are in pandemic, the only thing that creates possibility to react is to let the population, everybody, deal with it and accept and adapt. It doesn't go away. The pandemic, the COVID will be here with us. If we don't adapt, if we don't vaccinate, if we don't adapt to this, it won't happen. It's the same with the infodemic. Forget about any rules. You can have a rule in, 2-5 years' time at a global level, but at that moment we will be far ahead with the capacity, technological capacity, and the instruments that somebody will use in doing that. So we are far behind. We are losing resources doing that way. I think that we have to let education and the population to adapt.
If you allow me just in less than a minute, I mean, I would totally agree with you with the exception of one point. If this was a natural phenomenon that was organically driven, I would totally agree with you. Yet, what we have faced and witnessed firsthand is that this could be sometimes orchestrated. And
that's defense and security matters.
Not exactly. I agree with my sister Al-Khater, really. Here we are talking about an algorithm that has been designed by the specialists. There is a certain brains behind that, and with algorithm works better than human brain and with a particular purpose. That's social media platforms. They are reaping benefits from our nationals. And certain ads are put over there, and they're getting huge amount of money. Here, social economic aspect is yet another thing, and they're using sophisticated algorithm mechanisms. They will continue to do it as much as they're getting more benefits from that process. Yet it's another challenge. Therefore, we are
responsibility is a part of the solution in any case. Yes,
Therefore, we should bring with the responsibility within the wider international platforms, all international community, and demand from these high-tech companies what they are doing, and they should also have a certain responsibility. I do believe that sometimes talking to them, they also maybe need our interaction as well.
And if you allow me, just 30 seconds. I mean, we saw this actually happening in the case of Palestine. We saw Facebook censoring content of people who are reporting what's going on. The Palestinians have been censored. Some accounts, or many accounts, have been suspended just because they were reporting the facts that they were seeing on the ground. My point is, even regulations are being used, but unfortunately, they are being twisted not in the right way. Therefore, there
actually Twitter closed my own account.
Oh,
Because I was
okay, this is getting really interesting,
in the
but we're
context of
over time.
Armenia-Azerbaijan war, I was providing real facts on the ground. When Armenian armed forces hit Azerbaijani civilians, I was on the ground and taking photos and putting on my Twitter, and Twitter stopped my account because some Armenian groups complained that.
So that's my point.
I was talking about
you
the
can't
truth.
protect
I was talking about the
everybody.
facts.
You can't protect everybody.
And
You
there
have
was
to
no
adapt.
one in Twitter to
You
truth
have
to
to
tell.
adapt. You
So who's
can't
the Twitter then?
protect from that.
This is
They
getting
will find
really,
a way.
really interesting. But we're actually over time.
Yes.
But we started a bit late, so that's why I thought it could be fine. So as I promised, we need to get one question from the audience at least. Please go ahead. Yes, I think my technical colleagues would. Oh, no, okay. Would you mind taking your mask off? Because it would be hard to hear you from this
Hear you.
point. Yes, thank you. I really don't want to cut you off, but we're over time, and one question would be enough at this point. I'm very sorry to cut you off there. If it is about fake news and post-truth, that would be appreciated.
Not so important, but trying. Yeah, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. From one side, yes, my country really, we are facing psychological warfare, especially orchestrated by Armenian government of Armenia and Armenian lobby groups, unfortunately. And recent 44 days, I have provided what example, F-16. We have facing immense attack of the fake news as if Syrian mercenaries fighting in Azerbaijan. And even my president in his interview asked a professional journalist, it was an influential media, said, but who is it of Syrian mercenaries? Please give me one example. But simply there was no such example. We said that Turkish special forces are in Azerbaijan fighting Armenians. Simply there was no special Turkish special forces. These are all elements of this fake news attack on a daily basis, and it come to the scale of the psychological warfare or hybrid warfare. Currently what we are facing, but our entire cities and mosques have been destroyed in the occupied territories. Now we are facing with the immense attack, but as if Azerbaijan destroys Armenian cultural heritage. Really, sometimes it hurts in a person, but I see my cultural heritage destroyed, but I can't prove it because there is an immense attack on the social media. But as regards Azerbaijani government strategy, how we are building our social media strategy as a government-wise. First, it's our government-wise guiding instruction to all government institutions so that to be effective in the social media or social platforms, we should be over there. There should be stronger government and effective government communication strategy, well coordinated and quite efficient, and in an immediate basis should be operative enough to respond certain issues that happen at least as a national level. And as international level, there is also crisis communication coordination that we are trying to provide. But still we do regret that still there are goalkeepers. It also applies to the international media. That, for example, there is such a joke that Figaro writes about weather, sports, and Azerbaijan. When they are writing about Azerbaijan, when you have a right of reply, they refuse to provide it. That's yet another challenge. In the meantime, we see, unfortunately, such a tendencies, but we should fight. It's an uphill struggle to provide our truth.
Okay, we should fight. Any final remarks, because we have to really wrap it up, please.
I mean, if I have a minute, I can willingly give it to any of the ladies for gender equality, since a gentleman asked a question. More than happy to volunteer my minute to any lady if they have.
Any questions? Yeah, please go ahead. No? Okay. Okay.
I just would like to thank you once again. I really enjoyed the discussion. I didn't even feel the time. And
Yes.
I would like to wish Antalya Diplomacy Forum best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
If you have any final
Well,
remarks,
just a
you're more
quick
than
final
welcome.
thought. We shouldn't assume that there is only two solutions to ban and to control and the chaos of information. There are many, many solutions in between. I mean, think of Twitter. Twitter could be changed dramatically. How about limiting retweets to 50 a day so that things don't move so fast and don't get viral so fast and you can still communicate? Sometimes these companies tell us that, there's nothing we can, there's a lot you can do. You can tweak that algorithm in 1,000 different ways. Let's have a discussion and let's do it.
Okay, don't give up to democracy and freedom of speech. Even though we have social media, we have fake news, we have the environment that we are living in, we have to adapt, and by the way, that's the future.
Thank you so
And
much.
with all due respect to freedom of expression, I fully agree with you, but also freedom of expression of one ends from where freedom of expression of others starts. Therefore, we should respect in this due process, but with tendencies shouldn't violate the freedom of expression of others.
I really wish that we had another 45 minutes because isn't this such an interesting topic
Thank
that
you.
I would love to delve deeper, but unfortunately this is all the time we have. I would like to thank you one by one for bringing your insight into this. It was really interesting for me, and I really hope that the audience enjoyed it as well. And this is your applause, my fellow panelists. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you, Ellen. Thank
being with us today.
you. And thanks,
Thank you.
Antalya Diplomacy Forum.
Thank you. Thank you.